Hi and welcome to a new video. Today we will talk about cognac. We will have a look in the history, in the production process, and we'll also have a look in some numbers. Yeah, so I would say, let's start. Before we start now with the history of the cognac, I just want to let you know that there are some French words which are difficult to pronounce, so if it's not always 100% correct, sorry for that. And here you will also find some pictures through the presentation. And yeah, so I would say let's start with the history. We need to jump back in the 15th century. It were the Dutch who brought the distillation process to France. The town Cognac was known for their wine trading, and through the town Cognac leads the river Charente. And this river was very important in the ancient years because it was a trading route to the open sea, and mainly they traded their salt and wine. And because Cognac was so well known for their wine, the town developed very good. And the problem was that this wine was transported very long and far distances by ships and boats, and it didn't last very long. So they need to find a way how this wine could last longer. And therefore the distillation process was brought to France. First, the Dutch took the wine to the Netherlands and distilled it there. But this was not very efficient, so they decided to distill the wine directly in France. So the distillation process got more and more efficient, and they changed from normal to copper stills. And also at the beginning of the 17th century, they started with the double distillation. The double distillation helped the cognac to get more resistant. And there exists this funny legend from Lord of Segonzac. He was a pious man, and once he had a dream of Satan. The Lord found himself in Satan's cauldron and he tried to cook him. But because the faith of the Lord was so deeply rooted in his soul, he resisted the first cooking process. So Satan needed to cook him again to achieve his result. So this is the legend behind the double distillation process. And it happened actually by accident that once the ships couldn't be loaded and the casks were held back. So they found out that when the liquid inside the casks stays there for some time and even longer in the casks, then the taste developed very good and was very enjoyable. This was actually how cognac we know nowadays was born. And it was in 1643 when the first cognac house was founded, named Rogier, and they still produce nowadays cognac. And in the 18th century, more cognac houses were founded, like for example Hennessy, in also Martel and Rémy Martin de la Main. And it was in the 19th century when cognac experienced a real boom. In 1799, there were 36,000 hectoliters of cognac, and in 1879, there were 478,000 hectoliters. So a huge difference there. Of course, there was this free trade agreement between France and England, which helped a lot to accelerate this process. In the middle of the 19th century, also the glass industry became a breakthrough because they decided not to transport cognac by barrels. They decided to change into glass bottles. And because of this high demand after cognac, there were in 1887 more than 280,000 hectares of vineyards. At the end of the 19th century, something very bad happened because there was this famous Phylloxera infestation which occurred, and this caused a huge damage to all the vineyards. So from the 280,000 hectares of vineyards, there were only 42,000 left. They decided, okay, so we have to do something, we need to change the vineyards. So because of that, they decided to import more resistant grapes to France, and they found them in the USA. This new grape they found was Uni Blanc grape, which nowadays is about 98% of the grapes used for cognac. The problem was in the beginning that this new grape was not used to this chalky soil, and it took many years and hard work to achieve a good growing grape. And the previously cultivated grapes, Colombard and Feuille Blanche, were more and more replaced by this new grape Uni Blanc because it was more resistant and it was easier to handle it. Today, cognac is subject to the protective seal of the Appellation d'origine contrôlée, which means that the designation of origin is controlled by this organization. In addition to that, it's subject to a specification that shows exactly what cognac needs to fulfill in order to be called cognac. Today, cognac is divided in 6 different crus, so wine growing areas, and I have here the map where you can see these 6 areas. It's the Grand and the Petit Champagne. We have the Borderie, we have the Fin Bois, the Bon Bois and the Bois Ordinaire. It's very important that the cognac which you produce has grapes from one of these regions. I just spoke a few minutes ago of this chalky soil and also this maritime climate. These are 2 factors which ensure the optimal conditions for growing wine. Okay, so let's talk first a little bit about these 6 crus. First we have the Grand Champagne. The Grand Champagne has a very chalky soil. It's mountainous. It's the 3rd biggest area. They have about 13,250 hectares of vineyards. They have these floral notes. So the second cru is the Petit Champagne. The Petit Champagne is not that mountainous. It has also a chalky soil, and it's the 2nd largest growing area with 15,250 hectares. The cognac has also these floral notes, but a little bit lighter. The 3rd cru is the Borderie. They have 4,000 hectares of vineyards, and the soil is rather loamy and with lots of flint, and this leads to a unique taste, nutty and more like caramel. The 4th cru is the biggest, the Fin Bois, with 31,200 hectares of vineyards, and the soil is a mixture between clay and limestone. The 5th cru is Bon Bois with about 9,300 hectares of cultivated land. And the soil is a mixture of clay, sand and lime, which gives the cognac a more round taste. And the last cru is Bois Ordinaire. It has a little bit about 1,000 hectares of vineyards, and the soil is sandy. Also the islands Ile de Ré and Ile d'Oléron are part of this area, and the taste is more this maritime style. And we just heard before that the main grape which is used is Uni Blanc, and the Uni Blanc has this fruity taste with lemon and quince. And in addition to the Uni Blanc, there are Feuille Blanche, which has a more intense flavor with peaches and apples. Then there's the Colombard. Colombard has more exotic fruits or nectarine, rhubarb. And there are 2 more, but they are not that well known. They are called Monty and Folignon. The harvest of the grapes starts normally in the mid of September. Immediately after the harvest, the grapes are compressed by an air press. The result is a must, which is then fermented into wine. The alcohol has a content of 9% alcohol by volume, and the process of this air press guarantees that you concentrate the aromas from the grapes and you get a higher acid content. And this process also allows the wine to be preserved very well. So when you're making wine, it's forbidden to add any sugar, which guarantees that the fruitiness of the grapes is retained. Then you start with the distillation process. I have here a link to a video where this distillation process is explained more in detail if you want to have a look there. This double distillation process, which we learned from the history part, is called chauffe, which means to heat. The first distillation process is called bruit, which leads to the second distillation process, which is then called repasse or one chauffe. During the second distillation, you have three parts: the head, the middle part, and the tail. The head and the tail can be used in another second distillation again, and the middle part is a clear alcohol, which is called eau de vie, which means water of life. This has a very high alcohol content. It may not exceed 72.4% of alcohol. It's very important that the distillation process is finished until the 31st of March, after the year of the harvest. Then the eau de vie must be matured in French oak casks for at least 2 years. So why do they use now the French oak and not, for example, American oak? The reason is quite simple. The French oak has the great advantage that it has less tannins, and also it has this special pigmentation which leads into a redder color. By the way, you can use about 20% of the oak to make a cask. The casks are then stored in different cellars. A cellar can be very dry, it can be very humid, and this leads into another different aromas. Long-aged cognacs produce a very smooth, rich and complex flavor. Sometimes these very old cognacs develop a rancio taste. This taste has flavors like mushrooms, like autumn leaves, a little bit musty, also maybe a little bit oily. So when you're maturing cognac in a barrel, it's very important that you monitor the maturation process, because not every cognac develops same. It's very important to have a good nose and a good sense of taste. A few minutes ago I spoke about what a cognac needs to fulfill to be called cognac, and there is another specification. I have here two bottles. One says 1977 and one says lot 57. If you open a cask and close it, and it is not supervised by someone from the National Cognac Bureau, then you are not allowed to write the exact vintage on the bottle. If it is supervised, it is always opened and closed with someone from the National Cognac Bureau, and he will close it with a wax seal, so that's 100% sure that no one opened this cask without this person. It's of course more expensive if you always have someone from the National Cognac Bureau who monitors the open and closing process from the barrel. So if you don't want to use your cognac as a single cask or like a vintage cognac, you cannot of course blend and mix different cognacs together, which leads mostly in an extra old or VSOP. You also can reduce the alcohol by volume if you add some distilled water, and sometimes you have very old casks, and when you say the maturation process is completed, but you don't want to bottle this cask, you can put them in so-called damjan. These are glass balloons with a content of 5 to 45 liters, and you can leave them in your cellar for another, let's say, 30, 40, 50 years. The maturation process is completed, but if you want to store them for another few years, that's a good possibility to do. And sometimes if you see a cognac over 100 years old, let's say from 1910, this doesn't mean that it was the whole period in the cask. It was maybe only for 60 or 70 years in the cask, and the rest of the time it's spent in a damjan. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of cognacs which are on the market. In addition to the vintages or single cask bottlings, you have, for example, the VS. The VS is the very special cognac which matured for at least 2 years. You have the VSOP, the very superior old pale, minimum age 4 years. You have the extra old, minimum age 10 years. The extra old, minimum age is here 14 years. You have the Napoleon cognac. Napoleon cognac has a minimum age of 6 years, so it's quite similar to the VSOP. You have the Reserve cognac, which has a minimum age of 10 years, but needs to be on average 25 years at least. You have the Hors cognac. Hors cognac is between 30 and 50 years, but sometimes even cognac with over 100 years old. The Hors is also one of the oldest cognacs you can get, next to the Ancestral or the Très Vieille Reserve. When it comes to Ancestral, you speak from the oldest cask the producer has to offer. In addition to the Ancestral, you have the Très Vieille Reserve, which has an average age of at least 80 years. You have the Extra Cognac, average age between 15 and 25 years. You have the Cuvée Cognac, and in the Cuvée Cognac there is no minimum age, but it says it has the best casks which user has to offer. Before we come now to the end, I would like to give you some facts and numbers to cognac. Over 97% of the cognac produced in France is exported to the United States and China mainly. China has a very high demand on cognac, so it might be that in the next years China will overtake the United States. In 2022, 150 million bottles were sold just to the United States. The whole sales volume was 4.5 billion US dollar, and today we have about 83,000 hectares of vineyards, 1,300 producers, and these producers also distill themselves. From this 1,300 producers, about 450 sell cognac under their own names. The most expensive cognac sold so far was a cognac from Creuset called Cuvée Léonie 1858, and it was auctioned for over 150,000 US dollars. So that's it for today. I hope you liked the video and maybe also learned something new. If you'd like to leave a comment, please do so. And I hope we will see us in the next video again. Thank you very much.